In today's episode of Rebuild It with AwesomeFramers, watch how Timmy decides to nail two trimmers together, blasting the living daylights out of them, and then promptly realizing he didn't need a double trimmer. What's he going to do? He's going to rebuild it. First of all, the Sawzall is your best friend. Second to that, a pry bar is your second best friend. Now watch the master nail puller at work. Never once did he shed tears. He promptly got busy rebuilding it. On next week's episode of Rebuild It with AwesomeFramers, welcome to Balloon Framing Part 2. It turns out that as I've been editing, I have way more content than just 2 or 3 videos. So we're gonna go long form and hopefully do this in 3 parts, but I bet you it's gonna be 4. What I wanted to show with this particular wall, this is a front room, actually it goes to the left where the left guardrail is. I have 2 2040s on the lower floor for the powder room and the pantry. And I have a centered, I think it was a 4040 up above, maybe it's a 3040 for the upstairs utility room. Because of the 2 windows at the bottom portion of this wall, the engineer wants straps across at the sill and at the header. And that's called force transfer around opening. You can do a Google search on that. Pretty common engineering detail. Basically, we've just punched a bunch of holes in our shear wall, and because of the height, etc., that's the detail. So, that means that I need to lay out my wall for a few things when it comes to blocks. Number 1, I want 4x6 blocking where the strapping is gonna go, and I'll show you why in just a moment. Second, I need panel edge blocking for my shear walls. That's the flat 2x6s. And third, I need blocking for fire stop. One of the major concerns that we have about balloon framed walls from the old days is the fact that fire can get into those long stud bays and get anywhere. It can get into the floor system, it can get into the attic. So I'm trying to balance all of that. In addition to that, and I'll show this in just a little bit, because I have a 2x6 at the top and bottom of my LVL header, essentially that is fire stopped. What we're trying to do is make every stud bay no more than 10 feet between blocking. So that's why there's a mixture between the flat blocking, the 4x6 blocking, and blocking that we would call on edge. Notice that I cut all of those 2x6 blocks by eye. Partially that's because 1, I trust myself, but 2, I've eyeballed and either run a string or straightened the long studs. And then all the end blocks I cut an 1/8 short. Now, here's just the obligatory, you're gonna notice in just a moment. By the way, I was working alone, so there it is. How many framers does it take? Well, if you clone yourself, at least 3. So I will say this. At 44 years of age, I find that being bent over for walls like this, I need to take more frequent breaks, especially if I'm working alone. So what better thing to do with that time than to take dronies, which is the drone version of a selfie. Okay, I don't mind saying I'm struggling today. It is definitely a Monday. So here's our 2-story wall. 2040, 2040, then 3040. Solid blocking because I have to, this is force transfer around opening, which means solid coil strap. Blocking there and up there is for panel edges. Anyway, but hey, check out that sweet hat. That's quite the pick me up. It can make even an ugly framer look less ugly. Since all of our layout started on the left-hand side of that, let's just say from this perspective, if north is up and south is down, all my layout started from the northwest corner, coming forward and then going left to right or east-west. So that's why I can't just start with a 4-foot stud on one end. So I start in the middle, I route it, I put pieces on, snap a line, and I cut those. Now the reason I did this is so that I could actually cut in about 1/4 inch. That wall, once it goes up and it butts the next wall, I don't want any reason for it not to be able to pull nice and tight. A question I got in the last video, and it's a question we get pretty common. Frankly, I should have covered it in the last video. Why don't we stagger our wall sheets? So notice that I put the middle sheet down on the first row and then left and right, and I did exactly the same thing up above. What that means is that our long panel edges, the 8-foot edge, railroads. So think of railroad tracks. That's the exact same thing that happens here. We don't stagger our sheets. So the question is, why not? Because the code tables don't reflect any benefit from that. Our panel edges are required to be blocked, so we've got our 6 inches around the panel edges. It doesn't matter if we stagger them. Because we don't have high winds, that's not really an issue for us. I've talked to our engineer about it. Now in Tor Madison's book, which I'll try to link below, Shear Wall Basics, he does mention that you can have 20% less deflection if you stagger the seams. But that doesn't really matter because our wall's already properly designed and has a safety factor to meet the earthquake loads. So one thing he said too is that if we were concerned about that 20% less deflection, we could just tighten up the nailing spacing to like maybe 5 inches. And that way there's no additional labor for blocking. Now let's get into force transfer around opening. Remember I put those 4x6 blocks in? The top of those blocks was to the underside of my sill, and I went ahead and matched that with the tape. This is because I'm about to put 10 billion nails into this thing, and I feel like it's just some cheap insurance. So I'm snapping a line because I want my coil strap to be straight. I am not OCD, I do not need it to be perfectly straight, but it does actually go down a little faster if I have a line to follow. So this is Simpson Strong Tie CS, or coil strap, CS20. I think it's the 75-foot roll, don't quote me on that. Here's how I like to install it. I keep it in the box, and about every 6 inches starting from one end, I'm gonna go ahead and pull that strap and nail it so that I don't have any bubbles in it, and it follows that line. It doesn't have to follow it perfectly, but I want it to look decent enough. And if I go about every 6, 8 inches, 12 inches and kind of work back a little bit, I'm keeping it straight enough. It doesn't need to be perfect. Straight enough with no bubbles in it. So once I shoot my way across, pun intended, I'm gonna go ahead and cut that strap off, and then I'm gonna go through and nail the whole thing. This is a 2.5 inch by 0.162 inch positive placement nail, and I need that longer nail because I'm shooting through the sheathing. The 4x6 blocking won't split. I've done this. It's not gonna split on me. And these are tested details. Yes, I need better snips and stronger hands. I fight this stuff every time I have to snip it. So I have already installed the strap above the header. Now I'm gonna go ahead, now that this lower strap is straight and it's tacked, I'm gonna go ahead and nail it off. Why didn't I do them at the same time? The short answer is because that gas-powered nailer gets hot because of the spark. It's igniting gas, that's how it works. Now it's time to just nail. Get into a rhythm. Okay, so if you didn't know what force transfer around opening is, you could Google it. But basically for us, I put the piece of tape on first, I snap a line. I'll end up posting video of this later, but that's all 2.5 inch nails. Billions of them. In fact, it's an infinite amount between there and there. It's just the way math works. Don't even get me started about metric. Okay, so I'm alone, if you didn't figure that out, and I'm tired, but I'm gonna tape and install these windows, tape and install the window, get out of here. In the morning, I'll trim it, and maybe I'll have some help to lift the wall. That wall, by the way, goes right here. And then it will be time to build this 2-story rake wall with the bump out on top of it that will look similar to that wall. I can't zoom, that's closer to us. Not that you even care. Okay, I think I will open myself up to criticism. So, tape run along the wall, snap a line on top of the tape, nail my coil strap per the engineer. Then I tape my sill and stretch tape over the top of all of that. I don't believe that's going to leak. Who wants to wager some money? Oh, by the way, check out that sky. Who wants to wager me some money that that window is not going to leak? Oh, you didn't see that. Nope. Oh, happy Monday, everybody. I have the face of a pufferfish on prednisone this morning. Would you like to know why? Because Timmy did something he does not normally do. Normally I'm in bed by 9. Well, I was, but I stayed up late reading to finish a book. I haven't done that in years, because usually I just fall asleep in said book. And Kyle and I are starting at 6:30 all week because it's going to be hot. So, Tuck Pendleton, 0 defects. It was so hot when we were doing this. We were starting at 6:30. I think it was 80 degrees by 9 o'clock in the morning. And that, for us, that's hot. So we only ended up working, I think, till 11, getting out of there. Just too hot. Too hot for us. Okay, so let's talk about setting windows and walls before we lift them. What's the process? How do we make sure that they're level? So step 1 is that we want to flash the sill. A sill pan. So to do that, we use 6-inch zip tape, and we cut it the width of that opening. So in this case, 2 foot, and we fold it over. Then it's 1 foot pieces of stretch tape so that it folds up 6 inches up the jamb. That stretch tape is amazing stuff once it's all rolled. Even though we have a seam, first of all, you should never get so much water that you should worry about the seam on the sill pan. If you have that much water, then something is seriously wrong with the rest of the install. So we, for all intents and purposes, or intensive purposes, have a seamless sill pan. Then I caulk the legs and the header piece, and I go ahead and set the window in the hole, and I pull it up to the top, or I guess in this case it would be bottom left. I put a mark, and I push it opposite, and I put a mark, and then I center it between that. I put a screw there, and then I pull the window so that it is parallel with the bottom plates. Because the bottom plates are level, I know that my window will be level. Parallel to level is level, and perpendicular to level is plumb. I squared the window just to show you, the viewer, that that's the next step that we take. It doesn't matter with picture windows. It's much more important with sliders and single hungs. Hey, since we're here, we might as well trim the windows, right? So we use a corrugated fastener gun to picture frame the window and set it as a unit, as you can see, much faster than biscuits or pocket screws. Then it's the head flashing, and we tape that to the wall. It was so hot. I don't think I've ever been. I think I could have taken off every piece of clothing and wrung it out. We were just beat after this. Okay, they're up. Up and away. We are back ordered on that window, so. Oh, hey, Kyle.
Hi.
Can you maybe demonstrate how horribly the window operates? I mean, those reveals.
I think it probably should just be thrown away at this point, because it's just never going to operate correctly.
Oh, man.
I hung this window without even looking, too.
Okay, so that's what we mean by balloon framed. I'll follow that up later as we get more walls up, but 2-story walls, etc., etc.
Like, imagine a balloon, and you frame it.
So I had to work a day alone. Kyle was on vacation, and then I had a helper for the rest of the week. Shane's back, and it was good to work with Shane. I like working with Shane. He's got a good sense of humor, and he's nice and calm. So this wall, which in the spirit of post your mistakes, I will be showing you a major mistake. What I'm doing there while Shane's getting some things ready, I think one of them was filling up the forklifts with diesel, is I was doing all the ciphering on my stud heights because this wall is 2 stories plus a gable. So it's a little slow to get started. You've got layout. I want to go over a game plan with Shane, get those end studs. You're going to see how all of this goes together. But remember, because we're building big walls, the mistakes also get much bigger. And so it's best to slow down, and then once you get into a rhythm, you can start to go. Now, because we're using 2x6 Doug fir, and mostly it was nice looking material, but the longer the material, the more squirrely it gets. So here we get the skeleton framed, calculate the top plates, calculate the sides. I usually story pull it and do the math, double check myself. We're gonna go ahead and check it all for square before we lock those edges in, but already we made a mistake. This wall is 5.5 short where Shane is on the right. And that way my sidewall, which you'll see in the next video, can run full length for siding. So all Shane had to do was pull it back to the 5.5. So for me, I find that when I do that, it's easier to cut my top plates as though it's an outside to outside number instead of an outside to butting. I'm sure that's clear as mud. You'll see it as it goes up. So then we make sure we get it square. While Shane reads me off numbers across the bottom plate, I calculate what the diagonal is and lay out the top plates, king studs and studs. And then we went ahead and snapped out the king studs and our longest studs. And the reason for that is we can tack them to the floor and keep it all nice and straight. It makes the blocking a little bit easier. It also means you can go into autopilot as you're framing. So Shane has our 1 3/4 by 9.5 LVL with the plate on top and on bottom. That's also going to form our fire stop. It's going to separate the lower portion of the wall from the upper portion right through the middle. Then it's a matter of double king studs for stiffness during the lift. I went ahead and cut those at the same time because I have a 10 1/4 inch Skill cordless beam cutting saw made by Skill that was able to cut those bevels, which means once I have my long point, I get 2. I can double up my king stud without taking any additional numbers. So now it's a matter of Shane just nailing those together so that they're nice and smooth. If I've done my job as the cut man, I've opposed the crowns, and so as he nails them nice and flush, they're going to oppose each other and theoretically be straighter. Then he adds the trimmers and the header. And then we're going to go ahead and fill in. Now there's something really unique about this wall, and you'll see it in just a moment. Standard operating procedure for us is to always nail the windows together first before the studs on either side, and that way you have access for your tools like your nail gun, or in cases like this with a double king stud, we're going to use 5 or 6 inch long Simpson Strong Tie SDWS screws through both trimmers into the header because it sucks everything nice and tight. Now that the lower floor opening is set, it's time to work on the upper floor window. So I like to snap a line from the center of my bottom plate right to the peak. So it goes right across that header. Remember, we're already tacked to lines. We're square, we're parallel, all that good stuff. Now the king stud with the trimmer on each side can be installed, and it's going to keep things nice and parallel, centered on the peak, and of course, straight. That's our goal. I think these are 3050 windows where Shane is standing. You'll notice that we don't have headers at the top of the upper floor 3050s. And that's because they're rake walls, they don't need headers, there's no load there, realistically speaking, that can't be carried through the sheathing and just how it's all framed together. I've talked to our engineer about that, and the inspectors didn't have a problem with that on this job either. So it's a double 2x6 kind of flat, and then we're framing over the opening. The lower opening was bigger, and you're gonna see why in just a moment. So Shane's essentially laid out to bring that window exactly 3 foot off of the center column, and that's for our 3050s. But it allowed our double, maybe we even tripled those. Can't remember. No, they're just doubled. The double king studs to run from plate to the top. Now it's just standard framing. Shane's framing in the window. Notice that we do not have any cripple studs on each end of the sill. They provide no benefit structurally. Controversy. It's not in the code anymore. Then along that left-hand side, we run a full height. This is sheetrock backing, so it's a flat stud. Think California corner or L corner. We go ahead and run that full height because then when we nail that end stud to that, it keeps it nice, solid, straight. And that, again, just helps us have a nice straight edge when we bring that next wall in. So while Shane nails the double top plates at the top, then I'm gonna go ahead and start getting laid out for our blocking. I've already belabored the blocking point. I think you guys get the point at this juncture, so I'm just not even gonna talk about it. Again, here's the advantage of the fact that we went ahead and snapped our lines straight and tacked those studs straight. We can just go ahead and measure those blocks, and that way the blocking doesn't push anything out of parallel, put kind of a bow in anything. That blocking, the 4x6 blocking about even with the top of the header, that's our floor height. So remember, we're talking about fire stop. We want to separate the floor from the walls. So like if you're thinking in terms of a submarine or a ship, we want to be able to encapsulate each room and lock out air and fire. So from that, we can come down 8 feet, then it's flat blocks. We can go up 8 feet and it's flat blocks. It allows us to use up some scrap, gives us a nice big nailing surface, and there's just no advantage in putting them on edge. It's easier for the insulator to run his insulation as well in those wall cavities. What is this opening that I'm standing in? Well, you're going to see we have a bump out. So the bottom of that header is flush with the underside of the ceiling in that room. So we're using 104 and 5/8 studs plus 3 plates, 1 at the bottom, 2 at the top. We're about 109 and 1/8. So that's what we cut those trimmers so that that header is smooth with the drywall of the next floor. So Shane's packing sheets and I'm tacking and routing as I go. I'm gonna leave this in real time so you get a flavor for what's it really like to work with Big T and Shane. That's what I call myself. Most other people call me Timmy. You can call me Timmy too. I don't really care. Oh, and I should address too, one of the questions I got is, what is that nail gun? That is the Max high pressure framing coil nailer. So the nail that I use when we nail sheathing is a 2.5 inch by 0.131 inch nail. That is a true 8 common. So that's a framing gun. We can actually shoot siding nails with it, but it's a little less reliable for that. So our framing nails are 3 inch by 0.131, and our sheathing nails are 2.5 inch by 0.131. The coil nailer, what's the benefit? Much less reloading. I don't have to carry sticks and nails in my bags. And if I have a jam, I have clear access to the nose piece. The downside, they're heavier, except this is a high pressure coil gun. We run it about 280 to 300 PSI. You have to use the 500 PSI high pressure compressors. What that ultimately means is that the moving parts are smaller, the air chamber is smaller because it's higher pressure. So that gun with a full load of coils is still lighter than your Metabo, Hitachi, or fast load gun that only has 2 sticks of nails. The other downside is it's crazy expensive, but it is really reliable. We bought into this system way back in 2008 with the idea of increasing the longevity of our bodies, and I can only imagine tens of thousands of nails per job, and I'm carrying less weight on my wrist and in my bag, so anyway. Now, remember I said earlier that we held our framing back 5.5? That's because this wall is going to butt the wall that goes to the right there. So we're hanging our sheathing out 5.5, and we snap a line on the end so that we don't have any nails sticking out, but we hit that end stud. That sheathing is going to overlap the next wall. So as I mentioned in the last video, this really is like putting a big puzzle together, but if you can do 8 or 9 foot walls, you can do 16, 20, 30, you could do 50-foot walls. It's the same principle, just the studs get longer. But remember, if you make a mistake, it's often harder to fix. And yes, that is some foreshadowing. By the way, have you figured out the mistake on this wall yet? I bet you haven't, because I hadn't. It was really nice. Shane was more than willing to be the pack animal and the nailer. We always trade this stuff off so that no one person has to keep doing the same thing, because it just wears you out after a while. And the day before, working alone and doing that all myself, I was worn out. And that was only Monday. This is Tuesday. So this is one of the reasons I really love working with Shane, and I really miss him. We had a good time, and so it's like wherever possible, I want to work with Shane. So this was nice. So my job now at this point is just to fill in. Shane's gonna go ahead and tack them for me, and then I'm gonna route out those long angles. Typically, we don't run our sheets horizontally on gables because the waste is harder to use up, but in this case, it just made sense. It minimized the waste. So I'm gonna go ahead and route that edge off once we get this sheet in, and then at that point, it's just filling in little pieces out of scrap, cleaning up, and then once Shane's done, we can tape the wall and move on to the next aspect. Now, I said this in the last video, but it's worth repeating here. Because we're saving so much time building big walls, we feel it's important to slow down and get the nailing just right. And that's what we've taught Shane. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. I would rather the nails be set properly and the spacing done properly, maybe just a little tighter. And that way, a lot is riding on this wall, not just for the occupants down the road in an earthquake, but a lot is riding on it when we lift the wall. So the more confidence we have that we did a good job on things like nailing it off, the less stress there is when we go to lift it. You may or may not know this. I can't remember if I've mentioned it here on YouTube, but we are a family business that my dad started in 1978. So from the time I was a little kid, our prime directive, Star Wars reference, is to use up scrap. Try to make the most efficient use of materials. So when we're sheathing walls, we're like way, way low on the waste. Most of the window cutouts we're gonna be able to use up. So keep them close by. As you route and clean up your windows, stack them against the wall, blow off the surface, and just get used to using that router. Love it, so easy. Remember that big opening at the bottom of this wall? The bottom of that header is at the ceiling height. Well, now you know why we left it wide open like that, because we have a 1 foot bump out. So instead of framing that after the fact, let's just frame it on this wall, and let's go ahead and frame the roof at the same time. So this is just a little tiny, simple hip roof. I went ahead and used up a bunch of scraps from our 2x12 footing boards. Great place for this. We do not need 2x12 structurally. So why am I using 2x12? To allow more room for insulation. Really easy to do the layout on this. All of the commons are the same length, including those end commons. That automatically centers the hip. And then once that's kind of tacked in place, I can just measure in the ledger. The reason I doubled the ledger is because I want the heels of those 2x12 little commons to be fully supported. Probably totally irrelevant, but good practice. So how do we keep the fascia and subfascia and therefore the closed soffits level? Oh, wait a second. What's going on here? Uh-oh. And it's right about this point that I realize I did not calculate the height of this wall correctly. Yep, that is the pure look of disappointment. Somehow, when I did all the math, I even found the board when I wrote it down, I was off by the heel stand of the rafter, even though, so literally, I had everything correctly written down, and I just transposed numbers. So I was off by like exactly 12 inches. I just reversed, I think, like a 21 to a 12. So, Bonehead of the Day award goes to Big T. But remember, awesome framers are not awesome because they're awesome framers. They're awesome framers because they're really good at fixing their boneheaded framing mistakes. Say that 3 times fast. Okay, let's go ahead and fast forward here. Now we're back. Since my floor is level, if I use a square, that becomes square to level, which is plumb, and literally. But once the wall goes up, that will turn back into level, if that makes any kind of sense. So I'm gonna put that 2x6 subfascia, I'm gonna plane it with the rafter, then I'm gonna check to make sure that it is square to the wall and put a mark. On the other end, I'm gonna measure up from the bottom plate to that mark and check it for square, and that's how I know that I'm level. It's square to a level wall. I know, try it a couple times, it'll make perfect sense. Go ahead and then nail on all of our 5/4x8 LP fascia board. It's our smart side trim. Then because we have those 2 square marks on the wall, we can snap a line and we can go ahead and nail 2x4 backing on the wall. That's what you see there. Now between that and the 2x6 subfascia, we have our nailing surface for our soffit. So there's really no rocket science to this, or as our engineer says, this isn't rocket surgery. It really is just a matter of starting out level, keeping everything square and parallel, and then build square. So 90 degrees off of level, of course, is 90 degrees vertical or plumb. Now we can go ahead and sheet this little roof. Try to use up your scrap. Like we said, that's our prime directive, which, yes, it's a Star Trek reference, not a Star Wars reference. So you can see, again, how much time we're saving by being able to do all of this while we have a nice, safe, level surface to walk on. Is it hard on the body? Yes. Pure and simple. So that's why we try to share as much of the load as we can, and thankfully we only have to do it this way every so often. Could be worse. We could be roofers or hardwood installers or drywallers. So, you know, at least we get to look good. And because this is zip system, right, we want to tape all of these seams, and it's just a lot easier to do it when you are not on a ladder. So this is part of the system that is going to dry in the house until the roofers get here. So just nice and simple. It beats being up 2 stories, right? Now we get a sense of what is this wall supposed to look like. Remember, I still have a mistake to fix, but we're gonna come back to that in just a moment. So nice drone footage before lunchtime. Shane's job was going to be to install the roofing. Got a couple bundles there. As we come around the side here, notice the wall that I'm leaning on. The sheathing is sticking out 5.5 inches. That is going to nail into the wall that is currently being worked on. Looking at the bottom plates, you can see how we just built 2 little walls, landed this wall on top, built the windows into it, closed soffit. Shane's going on the eaves metal. Notice that the walls are strapped together at their top plates. As we set them, we go ahead and boom up in the little cage, and we strap them and connect them all. That way we're braced as much as possible as we go without bracing being in the way. So why all the drone footage? Come on, if you're building this and you had a drone, wouldn't you be taking footage too? It's just cool. That's what I meant in the first video. It was just fun. So here's Shane after lunch, getting the eaves metal on, and then he's going to start roofing. And it's my turn to start fixing a mistake. My mistake. So, I take great pride in being able to fix my mistakes as quickly as possible, and usually documenting those for Instagram. Shane making nice, steady progress on the roof. There I am with the pry bar fixing my mistake. What? Where'd that overhang come from? Yeah, so basically the mistake was, and you'll see it when we go to lift. So the fix is to lift the overhang up. So basically the rafters would have projected past the overhang. So I just took the overhang off and then I raised it the amount that I needed to get back to the right number according to the math. Stay tuned, you will see this momentarily. Oh man. I tell you what, I make mistakes so often, there's no point in sitting there and just feeling depressed about it. Just get into it and fix it. Okay, this is take what? 742?
70 million. I mean, 7. I mean, this is first try.
So how did I go about fixing this? Well, I used that Dude Tools pry bar, which is the best pry bar I've ever used, to lift that overhang enough that I could cut the nails with the Sawzall. We nailed the daylights out of that because it's part of how we keep the overhangs attached during the lift. So, on the bright side, it's built well. On the downside, it needs to be unbuilt quickly. And honestly, this didn't take that long. I think it took me a total of 20 minutes to actually yank the thing off of there. And then it was building up the plates, which I structurally screwed as I went, so it was strong. I mean, imagine basically like you're building a glue lamb as your rim joist. Like I needed, I think, 10.5 inches, or I forget what the number was. But by the time I was done with that, it's arguable that that was the strongest part of this wall. So anyway, like Morgan Freeman said in Shawshank Redemption, better get busy framing or get busy dying. Now, you didn't think we were just going to stop at the roofing, did you? No way. We have the pre-primed cedar shingles installed over Benjamin Obdyke Slicker Classic. That's a rain screen, so it allows for an air gap behind those cedar shingles. We have a 5/4 by 8 belly band that is nailed on top of 2x material, and that way we can tuck our siding under that later. We have a nice shadow line. So as Shane's doing the field, I'm cutting angles for him and just keeping him stocked. And then it's my job to stay busy, so I'm cutting the shadow fascia. That's the piece of trim that will go on over the shingles, butted up to the soffit. Now, this is not particularly fun. I don't like shingling to begin with. It's not that much fun on your hands and knees. You'll notice that Shane, he kind of takes the roofer stance here in a couple minutes. Yep, there he is. So he knows. He's kind of lay sideways. You don't really need that many tools. And you just kind of grind away at this. Doesn't take very long, and guess what? We can side this and do all of this work faster than we could set up staging. So why not do it? Oh, and by the way, when it comes to shear inspections, I'll get into this in a little more detail in the next video, but in all these years, we've been doing siding on the gables for probably the last 15 years or more. Never had an inspector squawk because they don't get up that high and they know that if the stuff is nailed well, I mean, you guys can see, we're taking the time to nail it. And you know what? Turns out some of the inspectors follow us on social media, so they know what's going on when they're not around. And that has actually worked out to our benefit and theirs. But I'll get into the overall issue of shear inspections in the next video because we've got a big wall that we're gonna frame, sheath, and side before we set it. Kind of like video 1 and video 2, but I'll be able to get into some of those kinds of questions in more detail then. So that was the last day I had Shane. I was sad to see him go. Like I said, I really enjoy working with Shane. We had a good time. Kyle is back from vacation. This is a Monday morning, and we are ready to lift this wall. And Kyle was really nervous. Why was Kyle so nervous, given that we lift these walls all the time, and we have together for years? It's because he knew I had made a mistake. We had Marco Polo'd and talked about it while he was on vacation. And so he wasn't there for this process. So he's just looking at this wall, and rightly so, wondering to himself, what other mistakes have I made? Or maybe what else did I miss and didn't think about? So he was more nervous. I wasn't nervous at all. I knew we'd done a good job, and I knew that the mistake that I made was fixed and was very strong. Now notice here that the wall does bow or bend. I would call that deflection right at that roof, but not very much. So it's nice and stiff. We're not just building walls that are going to be strong enough when they're fully in place and finished, but we're building them strong enough for the lift itself. That's why we have confidence during the lift, even though Kyle was a little nervous. My goal as the operator is to be very gentle with the controls, with the brakes, and with the accelerator, because I have to drive forward while going up and or out. Notice that the top of that wall is moving toward me, but not a huge amount. That's because we're being gentle. So I'm driving down off of the hill because I want to get as close to the house as I can. We have nice stable ground there. Once we get to a point, Kyle's going to kind of eyeball, and if I'm in a good enough position, then I'll be able to put my outriggers down, and now I can boom that wall all the way to the front of the house. So, the access that we had on this house, now you can see, this was the perfect situation for us to be able to balloon frame. Nice solid ground on the back, pretty level, and plenty of reach with the forklift and truss jib to be able to lift those walls all the way to the front of the house. I've said this in past videos, good communication between Kyle and me in this case, so the operator and the signaler, is paramount. So at this point, Kyle wants me to very gently lower the boom, get the wall close to the floor. We always just try to keep our loads as low as possible. Once we feel like we're in a good situation to finish the lift, and by that what I mean is, if we're in a good enough position here, then I can go ahead and put my outriggers down. So Kyle's gonna eyeball, and he's gonna tell me he thinks that we're gonna end up right where we wanna end up. Go ahead and put your outriggers down. That now increases the ability that I can boom out. It gives me a lot of stability. So now I can just focus on whatever he tells me to do and being nice and gentle with the controls. So we're gonna kind of go out and down as we go. Our joystick's getting just a little bit sticky. So I can't really go out and down as well as we used to. So it's more out for a ways, then down for a ways. Out for a ways, then down for a ways. So we're gonna get into a spot. All those nails that were basically sticking out, they kept us nice and straight on the floor. He's gonna pound some of those out, and then we're gonna go ahead and just set this wall right in place. As soon as that wall's in place, we're gonna get up on the other forklift with the cage, and we're gonna tie it together and then install the bracing. Just like the last video, I'm leaving this in real time because then you see exactly how it goes. It's hard to draw lessons from time lapse, especially something like this. So you can see we are not in a hurry to set this wall. We've already saved loads of time building that roof, the bump out, roofing it. We would have installed windows, but you guessed it, they were all back ordered. Would have saved even more time, but anyway, that's life. Nice and slow. Remember, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Now pay close attention to what Kyle's doing here. He's twisted the wall. Remember that wall that we're butting, the sheathing hung out 5.5. He's able to use that as a pivot point. So he can slide that in. Then as I either boom out or down, remember as I boom down, the stick or the boom gets a little longer. So he's keeping that all in mind. As he kind of pins it into that corner, then as I boom down, he can rotate. And the goal is to land it right where it needs to go without needing to reposition. And yes, with a sledgehammer, we can persuade it, but it's always like a personal test to see if we can get it close enough that it just requires some very light bumping. What he's telling me here is to lean. And I'll do a video in the future that shows all of our signals. We've reduced the forklift signals down to one-handed signals. So by leaning, that bottom plate will be out of level, but that allows him to pivot. And then as I go down, it just gently rocks right where he wants it to be. Yeah, and by the way, this was the DJI Air 2S drone at the time. Man, did that thing stay stable. I did no stabilization in post-production. That's how steady that drone stayed. So, yep, you see that? Kyle was stressed, so he kind of shook it off. Now we just take one good look. Like, okay, now we're ready to brace it. So while I land the drone, Kyle's gonna go ahead and double check that it's on the line. He's gonna use those big Simpson Strong Tie SDWS big structural screws. These are the type for deck ledgers, right? That's what we're gonna fasten it down with because we can always move it, but it also pulls the wall down nice and tight. So there's the wall, it's up. Something I wanted to point out, when we've got the forklift cage, notice the rigging is still a little forward. The wall just gets like front heavy, top heavy, whatever the case might be. So it's still leaning out slightly away from us. We're gonna get the bottom anchored, and then we'll boom up with that forklift cage, push it and screw it together, and then strap the walls together. So there's the whole process. Not bad. Good job, Shane and Big T. You guys did a great job. Oh, so there's the fix. See where the rigging points are on the wall? Those yellow brackets? See how I just built those plates up? Oh my goodness. But it was strong, so there it is. Now we have one big wall left, and then the back wall, which is going to be standard height. And you're gonna see how all of that goes together in the next video. We're gonna frame the big wall on the left, the back standard height wall at the back. Let's get into the floor framing, and we'll also get into how we went about laying out for the siding. If the video is not too long, we'll also go ahead and do a walkthrough. You can see how it all finished out. If it is too long, then that will be in part 4. So anyway, thank you guys for hanging in there with this video. This is so fun. I probably ended the last video this way too. This really did make this process fun. It allowed us to kind of stretch out a little bit. And yep, even though I made the mistake, it was still fun. It's not fun to fix mistakes, but hey, that's life. See you in the next video. Stay safe, everybody. Take care of each other.